Chapter 17. Hogsmeade Part 2. Sirius blinked stupidly as he looked at the black-haired crimson-eyed man standing in front of them. His. Vincent nodded, his crimson eyes never once leaving them. Honestly, it was highly unnerving looking at the man. Every instinct in Remus was screaming for him and run far and fast in the opposite direction. "So you are the fourth Genova project?" Remus asked, remembering that Genesis had mentioned there was a fourth that had been created after the first three. "No, I was used as a transmutation experiment. And later the Chaos Project." He had long ago come to terms with the demons inside of him, so admitting that he was a monster was of little to no concern to the man. Moving over, Sephiroth slipped his arms around Vincent and leaned in against him, offering up one of his chocolates. Smiling softly, Vincent took the offered chocolate, knowing Sephiroth didn't give up his sugar willingly unless he wanted to. "Chaos Project?" Rubbing his child's head, Vincent regarded the two in front of him. Chaos is an entity of the planet, also known as weapon that is designated for a purpose by the planet. In this case, Chaos is the harbinger of death. He collects the souls of those remaining on Earth during the planet's final days and guides them to the stream before Omega is summoned and takes the life stream to a new planet to begin life once more. "In a bid to save my life, Lucretia, Sephiroth's mother, infused my living corpse with chaos-tainted Mako. She ended up binding the weapon to me. And he's not exactly pleased being bound to a mortal, is he?" Sephiroth had seen from the life stream a few times Chaos had managed to wrangle control from his father, and he made his displeasure very well known. "No, he's not. He tells me frequently." Sirius shook his head, a deep growl surfacing in his throat. "This whole thing about Harry being some great general from 9,000 years ago is a little hard to believe, but I am willing to look past it for my godson. But to hear his father is not only still alive but harbors some weapon of the planet inside of him, that is pushing it a little too far." Reaching out, Sirius grabbed Sephiroth and pulled him to him, growling darkly. Before Sirius had fully pulled Sephiroth to him, a gold gaunt-covered hand shot out and wrapped around his throat, pulling him in close to a now ashen-colored face with brilliant glowing gold eyes. The power radiating off the man could be felt pouring off him in waves of heat. Remus shrunk away the wolf in him, telling him this was a very dangerous predator. "Mortal, you will release my host's offspring. If you refuse, I will take great pleasure in tearing you apart piece by piece." "Vincent, no." Chaos' voice was deep and sounded like multiple people were speaking at once. Self-preservation kicking in, Sirius released Sephiroth and found himself being flung back with exceptional force. "Chaos, you didn't have to go that far. Vincent could have handled it on his own," Sephiroth said, looking at the planet's weapon that his father was forced to harbor. Chaos scoffed but did not argue as his host was screaming in his head to let him have control once more. "The mortals of this time are pathetic creatures, even more so than the one I am forced to share my eternal existence with. The fear of the weapons is gone. This mortal should be trembling in my presence." Sephiroth rolled his eyes. Sounds like Chaos was going through a little PMS at the moment. "Chaos, go back to sleep and let my dad out. You're having a bitch fit again." Chaos growled but knew better than to touch his host's offspring, especially around Crimson Weapon. Looking down at his watch, Genesis smiled and sauntered over to Sephiroth and proceeded to pick the boy up and throw him over his shoulder. "Excuse me, gentlemen, but it has been nearly 9,000 years since I got to touch this beautiful man. I'm not waiting a minute longer." Sephiroth squeaked from his spot thrown over Genesis' shoulder. "Think you could make it any more obvious what your intentions are?" He grumbled but didn't fight the man, just kept a hold of his bag of chocolates. "Yes, I could have said excuse me, I'm going to go fuck your godson's brains out." Sephiroth groaned and smacked Genesis' ass since it was right in front of him. "For being so well-bred you sure are tactless." Genesis moved away, still with his lover thrown over his shoulder. "What just happened?" Remus asked, trying to get over his shock of what he just saw. Sephiroth and Genesis have been lovers since Sephiroth was 17. This is their first time together since Genesis' degradation. Vincent was brushing non-existent dust from his leather. Chaos was currently pouting in his head and bitching like hell. Sounds like Sephiroth was right and it was the weapons time of the month. So you're saying that my son is gay? Most soldier are, since they only allowed men into soldier, and the most soldier are too enhanced to sleep with an unenhanced. Their power is so great they can injure any unenhanced lover. Vincent shrugged. It was similar with the Turks. They normally stayed within themselves or rarely went up to soldier. Looking around, he spied some of the others walking around the village with people following them. Excuse me, but I must return to my watch. Turning, Vincent slipped into the shadows and seemed to up and disappear. Well, we won't be seeing Sephiroth for a while. Zack along with the others were currently sitting in the Three Broomsticks for lunch, and they had just seen a crimson-fueled blur shoot past and up the stairs, carting a silver blur over his shoulder. Is that what that blur was? Saisnai giggled, sipping on her butterbeer. She was one of the few reincarnates that seemed to still like the beverage. It seemed the others weren't as inclined to the overly sweet taste of the drink. She was sure Sephiroth would be all over it. There was laughter from up the stairs into the rooms above the Three Broomsticks. A moment later Tseng and Cloud moved back down. Seeing what Tseng was wearing, the group all snickered, many ducking their heads. Tseng was currently wearing Cloud's zip-up red cowl neck shirt, zipped up all the way, hiding his neck. The shirt for belonging to the smaller soldier was hanging off Tseng's thinner frame. Yeah, laugh it up, you lot. Tseng stuck his tongue out at them and gingerly sat down next to where Reno and Rufus were sitting drinking alcohol. With their changing looks, they looked well older than their 15 years, and they weren't easily recognizable as Hogwarts students. Also helped that they weren't going by their wizarding names, so they were pretty safe. I still can't believe that Madame Rosie Mata actually bought that. You all were old enough to drink. Elena shook her head, giggling softly, though her eyes were slightly dark as they fell on Cloud as he sat down beside Tseng. To this day she still had a very large crush on Tseng, and it pissed her off to no end that not only was he gay but he was married to the dumb hero of the world. He was too good for that emo chocobo soldier failure, but she would play nice since he was still her boss. There any plans for today? Tseng asked, seeing the group all munching on food, and stole some of Reno's. Hey, get your own damn food, boss man. Bite me, Reno. I would if there was any open spot left. Tseng flushed a brilliant crimson color and glared at Reno, his foot connecting hard with Reno's shin. Ow. I was just playing you. Rolling his eyes, Tseng looked over, seeing a figure and his dog move into the bar. Isn't that Professor Lupin? Who? Cloud asked, turning in his chair so that he could see the front of the building. Professor Lupin. He was one of the best Dada teachers we have had, but he was run off for being a werewolf. Zack said, standing up, and with pure soldier speed bounded across the bar and slammed into the startled man, hugging him tightly. Hey Remus, he said happily, looking down into startled amber eyes. Blinking over the shock of being glomped by a strange man with black hair and blue eyes. Wait. Remus looked up, seeing the brilliant glow of Mako in those eyes. His eye trailed along the spiked hair, seeing orange mixed in among the black. Fred? He asked, remembering how black had been seeping into the boy's hair at the Order headquarters. Zack, now actually, you here for Harry? Remus nodded. They had followed the Mako-fueled blur that was Genesis into here, but it seemed he had already whisked the boy up into the hotel portion. Yeah, don't count on seeing him for a while. Jen tends to get a little possessive if Seph's been away for a while. We used to see it all the time when one of them went away on missions. They would get back and we all knew not to enter their apartment or office for a few hours. Why don't you come sit down? Meet everyone since we're all awake. Hi Snuffles. Moving over, Zack kneeled down and rubbed Sirius' head playfully. Good to see I'm not the only one that can hold the puppy nickname now. Puppy. Zack perked up at that and turned, seeing Angel shaking his head. Oh come on Angel. He pouted but smiled and bounded over. Looking down to serious, Remus shared a look with his best friend and moved over to the table Fred. No, Zack had bounded off too. Moving up to the table, he was surprised to be greeted with warm smiles, even from one he knew shouldn't be smiling at him. "All right, let's introduce everyone now that we're all different and stuff. So we got Luna. Now Elena." Smiling, Elena reached out, gripping his hand tightly. "It's a pleasure to really meet you now, Professor." "Please just Remus. I am no longer your professor." She smiled even more at this and nodded. "Ginny aka Cisnai." Flipping her hair back, Cisnai reached out, smiling and giggling. "You taken yet, Remus?" She teased playfully, causing Remus to flush scarlet. "She has a thing for dangerous bad boys, you." Reno ducked as a coaster was flung at his head. "Reno. Obviously." Reno sat back up, smirking widely, and gave Remus a two-finger salute. Next to him is the ever-silent Rude. He talks when he wants to, but generally he just stays quiet. Rude Ordine, as Lupin recognized him, simply nodded and went back to his food. Mr. hiding in his husband's shirt is Tseng. "Oh shit." Zack ducked as he was leveled with the Turk death glare. Keeping his eye on the naughty little puppy, Tseng stood extending his hand to Remus. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you, as I am really Remus. My name is Tseng Akira, director of the Turks." Remus took his hand, feeling how firm it was and hearing the professional air in the way he spoke. This was a man that was used to dealing with politicians and high-ranking business officials. You could see it in the way he carried and presented himself. "My husband, Cloud Strife." He motioned to the man behind him. Genesis was correct, the man was shorter. Probably about 5 feet 7 inches in height, with golden blonde hair that was spiked. Even though he was small in size, he was wearing a shirt very similar to Tseng's, and you could see the hard-corded muscles in his arms. The man was built to fight, and you could see it in those brilliant glowing blue eyes. It was like looking into the eyes of an old war vet. "Genesis told us a little about you." He saw Cloud roll his eyes slightly as Tseng sat back down next to him. "Doesn't surprise me. Gen likes to run his mouth. If he isn't the center of attention, he starts hucking fireballs. I did try and break him of that habit by taking his fire material away. But he just stole Sephiroth's." Angel signed and stood up, holding his hand out for Remus. "Angel Hewley, or Neville Longbottom if you would prefer." Remus felt his eyes go huge as he took Angel's hand. He remembered a small meek little boy in his class. His boggart had been Severus, and they put him in his grandmother's clothes. Now the boy was an absolute behemoth of a man. His arms were nearly as thick as Remus himself was. "Is Severus still picking on you?" He had to see if that man was really that suicidal to be picking on this monster of man. "Yes, because Angel, as great a cook as he is, still sucks at potions. And his damn honor won't allow him to speak out against a teacher. Angel, if you don't start standing up to Snape, Seth is. And we all know Seth has no problem skewering people on the end of Masamune if they piss him off too much." Zack had seen plenty of that during his days of Shinra. Granted, Seth would then heal the poor son of a bitch that pissed him off, but still. He had no problem running them through with that sword. "We didn't really get a chance to speak with Sephiroth. What is he like?" "Sephiroth is about as polar opposite from Harry as you can get. I assume that Genesis told you about Sephiroth being a Genova project?" Remus nodded as Sirius sat down at his side. Because of this, Sephiroth was raised in a lab, so his social interaction is really stumped even after years and Genesis and myself trying to social him. He was bred for battle and has been training his entire life for battle. He's brilliant with battle strategy. He's never lost a fight, well, if you don't count the 3 times Cloud has killed him. But when it comes to interacting with people, it's like a 3-year-old. He's also got trust issues, more or like he doesn't trust anyone new. Angel nodded, steepling his fingers in front of him. It took Genesis and myself years to gain his trust enough that he opened up to considering us his friends. Sephiroth appears cold and indifferent, but it's that he's been taught to hide his emotions, that they are weaknesses. He's actually got a very strong personality, he's just hiding it. Tseng lifted up the brandy Cloud had bought him. Remus looked down at Sirius. That was one of the things Sirius had mentioned to him, that Harry had started to become cold. He does have a very large sense of humor. When he was 16 he colored Boss Man's dot red so it looked like a sniper dot. Reno pointed over to Tseng, who was groaning. The dot had not shown up since it was a tattoo he had gotten as a young child, but he had gotten it spelled back. He didn't look right without it. I got tackled about 4 times before Rude told me what that little asshole had done. Tseng growled but smirked, an evil glint in his eyes. I got him back though. Instantly the 2 former pranksters glanced up at this, that old thrill of pulling a good prank rising up in them. Oh? Remus noticed the evil light in those steel eyes. Tseng snickered, taking another sip of his brandy. His hair was electric blue for 3 weeks. Sirius actually snorted, and you could hear him laughing as much as a dog could. That started the Great Turk Soldier Prank War. Who did win that? Tseng shrugged, leaning back against Cloud, his free hand absently finding Cloud's and wrapping around his. He smiled, feeling those strong fingers wrapping around his in return, and squeezed. There was no definite winner. When we ended up flooding the soldier floor and the Turk offices blew up, President Shinra ordered it to stop. Rufus started to crack up where he was sitting, Deae by his side watching Sirius curiously over the table. I remember that. Father came home furious that his soldier and Turks were acting like children, pranking each other. Since the puppy forgot me, Rufus Shinra, former president of Shinra. Remus took his hand, surprised that Draco Malfoy was actually willing touching him. Man, where was I for all this? Zack pouted. He and Reno were considered the pranksters of Shinra. Gongaga. Angel said, setting his hand on Zack's head. This was before you signed up for the cadet program. Damn. Don't worry you. We got Hogwarts to prank now. We're gonna blow these 2 right out of the water. Reno shot a smug smile at Sirius and Remus and leaned back in his seat. Reno. Make sure to leave the C4 out of the pranks this time. You already blew up part of Hogwarts. Reno sat forward, a look of horror crossing his face. AWW, come on boss man. C4 makes the best explosions for pranks. I said no, Reno. But boss man. No. Fine. TNT. That's better. The group burst out laughing hearing that and shook their heads, knowing the red-headed Turk would take that to heart. Hogwarts was fucked. Hogsmeade had been over for nearly 3 hours as still there was no sign of Potter. His new group had all staggered back over the course of the day. Blaise had been one of the last to stagger back in. He was rumpled and in clothes he hadn't been in when he left that morning. They actually looked very similar to the outfit he had seen on the young blonde that had been wandering around the village. There was a slight limp to his gait and he had a weird happy glow about him, but was covered in ... Were those bite marks? Severus had simply shook his head and moved on. It looked like Blaise had had a good time in Hogsmeade and he had the whole "don't ask, don't tell" policy. Moving through the town he stopped hearing laughter coming from the door of the 3 broomsticks. The auburn-haired man he easily recognized as Genesis Rhapsodos moved out, holding it open for what he instantly recognized as Potter. Moving out, Potter wrapped his arms around Genesis and leaned up, kissing him deeply. They were talking in very low tones so he couldn't hear what was being said, but it was obvious what the two had been doing as Genesis was covered in love bites and his chest was bare under his leather duster, and Harry was sporting the black ribbed cowl neck sleeveless shirt that was just slightly too big for him. He saw Genesis asked something and Potter roll his eyes and give him a look which caused the auburn man to laugh and kiss him once more before heading off into the alleyway between shops. Potter. Sephiroth instantly froze hearing that voice. Shit. He should have known his absence would be noted, but he couldn't help it. Genesis was just too damn sexy to leave alone. His body needed to be worshipped. Professor Snape. He unconsciously pulled the shirt up a little higher around his neck, Genesis might not have been as big of a biter as he, but he did leave his fair share of them. I should have known. You are just like your father. No regard for the rules, no care that people have to be dispatched to find you. As long as you get the attention you so deserve. Sephiroth bit his tongue, those acid green eyes narrowing into a dark glare. He would love to tell this fuckhead off, but Snape could turn this around on him and he did not need that right now. Seeing a black shadow approaching Snape from behind, he forced a smile from his face. Looks like he wouldn't have to. I believe that your judgment of my son is highly biased upon that of his current bodies, sire. I can assure you that my son is not that which you speak. Snape about launched into orbit. He had not heard the man come up behind him. If this had been a dark wizard he would have been dead before he knew what hit him. Sneer firmly in place, Snape turned and found himself faltering some as he came eye to eye with bright crimson glowing eyes. The man was young, far too young to be the father of Potter, other than the fact you know. He knew James Potter was his father. Hold on a second, he said. His current bodies, sire. Severus looked back to where Potter was standing. Every day the boy appeared less and less like James and more like the man standing in front of him. Seph, go wait for me over there. I will escort you back to the castle. Sephiroth nodded, not wanting to fight his father. Honestly, he wasn't stupid enough to try a Turk. Even saying he knew when it was the wrong time to push the man's buttons. Severus turned his attention back to the man, seeing Potter leaving with not so much as a word in protest. No argument, no sass, nothing. If you have a problem with my child you will bring your problem to me. Not to him. You will not degrade my child as you have just done, especially in my presence. Those crimson eyes were dark and glinting with the threat of death if he made one false move. James Potter, Harry Potter's father, died 14 years ago. You are not Harry's father, so your words hold little power over me. But perhaps the Ministry will wish to know of your claim to. Severus stopped dead as a very deadly three-barreled mule gun was now pointing directly at his face, the crimson eyes now a brilliant glowing gold. You inform the Ministry of my host presence or the connection to his child. I will personally make sure that your body is never found mortal. I would remember your place. The eyes slowly returned to crimson and the gun was lowered and slung back into its holster at Vincent's side. Vincent moved so that he was now standing next to Severus, his voice low enough that only the spy could hear. To cross a Turk is never a wise thing to do. You believe the Cruciatus curse is torture. Cruciatus is warm-up torture for the Turks. We do not grant death till we see fit. Remember that if you wish to remain alive to see the snake fall. With that Vincent moved away, not glancing back once at the dark-haired man. Come, Seth. Sephiroth was shaking with silent laughter that was too fucking perfect.
Well, I do hope you enjoyed the videos so far and video game content. And don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button, and leave a comment down below. And I noticed 40% of you guys are not subscribed to the channel. If you can, please subscribe to the channel. It'll help me and help the channel grow. Until next time, goodbye!